So just everybody be careful and continue about our lives, but be careful, and we'll go from there. All right, tonight we have lesson number 2 in the book of Job, and so we're going to move right into that. Now, I just asked the chaplain to go back and check his email. The doorbell rang just as I was packing my bag to leave, and getting distracted with that, I left my notes at home. So I ran back to my computer and emailed them off to him, so hopefully he'll be able to get them printed down. If not, we'll just play it by ear. Wouldn't be the first time. So one question, though, that last week, if you'll remember, we started chapter 1, right? How many of you were here last week? Okay, most of us. So we're not starting too fresh. We started last week, chapter 1, and we described the book of Job as something of if Shakespeare were going to write a story about the ancient patriarchal period, as he often wrote about the heroes, Henry V and Julius Caesar and all of this. Job would be a great historical play for Shakespeare to write. And we talked about if Shakespeare were going to do this, and we were all gathered at the Globe Theater there at Stratford-on-Avon to watch this Shakespearean drama, we would have 2 stages. You remember that? We would have the lower stage, where we have everything happening on earth. So far, the major players have been Job and his family and his servants. And then we would have an upper stage with things happening out of sight of the players on the first stage. We have the upper stage of what is happening at the throne of God, and then the downstairs. Now, the upstairs stage is aware of the downstairs stage, right? But downstairs is not aware of upstairs. And that makes the plot much thicker, does it not? But I got to thinking as I was on my way home, I had referred to this, if Shakespeare were to write it, that it would be a Shakespearean tragedy. And then I got to thinking that's actually not correct. If Shakespeare were to write this little play that we find in the book of Job, would it be a tragedy or would it be a comedy? Now, that's a hard one to answer. When we think of a comedy, we think of, well, let's go back a little bit. We think of Jack Benny, right? A comedy. But in dramatic theory, a tragedy and a comedy, a tragedy is one where bad things happen and it ends badly. Hamlet, everybody dies. It's a tragedy. Probably the most famous of a comedy in this realm is, how many of you are familiar with Alighieri Dante? Dante's Inferno, right? The Purgatory, the Inferno, Purgatory, and then Paradiso, right? It's often referred to as the Divine Comedy, right? Even though Dante's poem is full of absolute tragedy. As he goes through the layers of hell, as he goes through all of the purgatory things, as he does all of these things, we find that it is absolutely horrible. The opening line of Dante's great poem begins like this: midway on life's journey, I found myself in dark woods, the right road lost. And I think that this Dante's opening line here could be picked up by Shakespeare if he were going to write this comedy of the life of Job. Now, the reason it's called a comedy is not because everything in it is funny. It's called a comedy because in the end, everything works out good. That's the true definition of comedy there. And so in reality, spoiler alert, if you haven't read the end of Job and you haven't gotten to the end of our play through all the twists and turns, it's a comedy. It's not funny. But in the end, it's going to work out. I often tell people, in the end, it's going to be okay. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. There's more to go through. There's another step in the process. So I want us to keep in mind as we continue this play, because today we're going to get some more dialogue down in the lower stage. And so we need to keep in mind that this is a comedy of tragedies. All right, so are you ready to just jump right in? Now we're going to be in Job 2. We did all of Job 1 last week. And just as a review, we saw last week the scene in the upper stage, a scene at the very throne of God. Now you'd think if we were to start a play at the very throne of God, everything would be beautiful, wouldn't it? Everyone would be happy. There would be singing. There would be angels floating about, lots of praise. And yet, in this play, that's not the scene that we see, right? We remember that we have Satan, the adversary, coming before God, and they discuss us, what's happening on earth. And you would think that all the celestial beings presenting themselves before God would be something like, oh, look down there, there's Brother Sharp. He's so faithful. Let's just bless and bless and bless him. And maybe they do. But in this instance, entering the stage is the adversary, the Satan. And God asked him what he's been up to, why he's there, what he's on about. And he says, I've been out patrolling the earth and looking around, basically causing whatever mischief I can. And God, amazingly, you'll remember from last week, is the one to bring up the name of Job. Now, it's nice to know that God knows our name. But if he's going to talk about us, I don't know that we want him doing so to this particular character in the play. Because God is the one who brings him up and kind of puts him in the face of the adversary. Okay, you're going around causing all this problem, but have you considered Job? He is a man upright, blameless. And then, of course, Satan does what he loves to do. He whispers to God, he doesn't really love you. He only serves you because of what you do for him. If you stop doing all those things, not only will he not serve you, but he will curse you to your face. And then God gives Satan carte blanche. He is in your hands. Only do not touch him. And Satan does his best. You know, have you ever had a bad day? Yeah, me too. Sometimes we have a bad day. There are days in our lives when we just have no idea what's coming, and it's a good thing we don't. Think back with me, perhaps that you're an office worker in New York City on Monday, September the 10th of 2001, and you're finishing your day's work, and you make a list of all of the things that you need to do the next day when you come into the office, people that need to be called, letters that need to be written, emails that need to be sent. You go home, enjoy a meal with your family, wake up the next morning, it's a beautiful fall day, and so you decide to go into the office just a little bit early to get a head start on things. You sit down at your desk there at the beautiful building you've worked at for maybe 5 or 6 years, and you start your work having no idea that life will never be the same for your entire family from this morning onward. That happened for thousands of people on September 11th, 2001. There are days like that. Job had a personal 9/11. where the devil let loose on him. And we remember from last week, messenger after messenger after messenger came, and it was just piling on, kind of like on September 11th. You remember we heard that a plane had hit the first tower, and we were all amazed and ran to the television. How many of you did that? And then as we were watching, amazingly, a second plane hit another tower, and we were all aghast, thinking, what's going on? And you can imagine in Washington, D.C., because two planes hitting in quick succession like that, this is something, this is an act of war. And so at the Pentagon, they're all running around like crazy trying to figure out what kind of response what should we do? And then a plane hits the Pentagon. And then we hear that there's a plane circling somewhere in Pennsylvania that they've had a contact from. And then we're praying for them, and then we see on the news as that plane crashes into a field. And we all collectively as a nation felt that boom. And you can't even catch your breath until there's another boom. And then another boom and another boom. Job had that, only every single boom hit him personally. You would think after chapter 1 that was quite enough. But one of the hardest words in the book of Job is the very first word of Act 2, Scene 1, and that is the word again. Again. Job's had a hard time in Act 1, did he not? He's had as much tragedy as just about anybody could take. And when you've had that kind of hit, one of the worst words you can imagine is again. Again. At this point, as we begin chapter 2, we left him in chapter 1. He fell to the ground, and then after an amount of time, we don't know how long that was, he arose, went into formal grieving, and his words were, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And we leave him there. And then we pick up with Act 2. And this word again warns us as we are reading this play or watching it acted out, that we're going to see a repeat. Now, if everything in the first act was tragedy, and we get a warning in Act 2 that there's going to be a repeat, that's foreshadowing of what's coming. But Job, remember, doesn't have the script. Again, at this point, as we begin chapter 2, it's just him and his wife and 4 servants. We know that there are 4 servants left out of all the hundreds and hundreds he had. Job, his wife, 4 servants left to pick up the pieces after they have dug 10 graves. So the 6 of them have gone out to dig these 10 graves, and this is exhausting, and they're looking around at the tragedy as Job puts his arm around his wife, and together they weep uncontrollably at the loss that they have had. But there's still hope, because tomorrow is another day. We can rebuild. You know, there comes a time when some of us have seen some of this time where after we've been married for a certain period of time and we've gone through enough of life and we've pared down, gotten rid of most of the possessions, the kids have moved off, and you look at each other and say, well, this is about where we started, isn't it? And that's where Job and Mrs. Job are. They're back to square one. But there's still hope. There's still hope. If God blessed them once, he can bless them again, can he not? And so when we hear again, maybe it will be again the blessings. Surely it would not be again the tragedy. Again, there was a day. And for any of us who have had a day like Job had, or a 9/11 type experience, the traumas of life, we live a little skittish, do we not? Again, there was a day. Now, Act 2, Scene 1 is going to be on the upper stage. Job, his wife, the 4 servants are still down here just reeling and trying to figure out what to do next. Back up to the upper stage. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Repeat of chapter 1. Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. Same exact wording as we see in chapter 1. And the Lord said to Satan, what have you been up to? Where have you come from? What have you been up to is the sense that we get from the words. You know, that's what I'd say if I was God. I'd want to know, what have you been up to? What mischief have you been causing that we need to address? What in the world are you doing here with your sad little self, presenting yourself? And he responds, because when the Lord asks, even the devil has to respond. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from roaming about on the earth, what do you think he's still doing? According to Peter, at least by the New Testament, Peter says he's roaming about, seeking whom he may devour. Not just bite, not just cause a little bit of upset, but to devour. Oh, how can we communicate to the young people in this world that the enemy who promises so much, his desire is to devour? From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it. Now that sounds innocent enough. And then the Lord said to Satan, now at this point, as the audience of this play, we're thinking, don't bring up Job. Let's give him a break. But the Lord does. He says, have you considered, same exact words as the previous scene, my servant Job? Have you thought about him, devil? You were here last time telling me, mankind can't really love you. They just respond to your blessings. You're not worthy of love just in who you are. Just as the devil whispers in our ear that God doesn't love us, he whispered in God's ear at this point. The deepest desire of humankind, and we are made in the image of God, remember that, and I think this is a reflection of the image of God in us. The deepest desire of mankind is to experience love. And the deepest fear of mankind is to be rejected in that love. One of 3 of the scariest words you can ever say are, I love you. Because when you say that, do you remember the first time you said that to a boy or a girl and you waited? How would they respond? But Job has passed the test. Everything's been removed, and he still said, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name, not the gifts, not the hand, but the name, the identity, the character of the Lord is to be blessed because that is its character. So, in this second scene, the Lord says, okay, you tried all that. Let's see what the outcome was, devil. Just like I said last time, it's still true. His character has continued. There's no one like him on the earth. Blameless and upright, fearing God and turning away from evil. The exact same description as he had before the trial. The trials and the circumstances have not changed Job. He still holds fast his integrity, even though you incited me against him to ruin him, and catch that last line, without cause. Yes, the scripture talks about being perfected through our sufferings, but we need to be careful. We're going to talk about this, I believe, in 2 weeks as we look at some of the causes of pain, which is an important thing before we really judge this. And Satan answered, okay, you got that round. However, skin for skin, yes, all that a man has, he will give, not for his possessions, not for his trade, not even for his children, but for his life. A man will give everything for that, and it's true. How much money is spent on medical care just in our country? People who will spend everything in their life savings to live just a little bit longer. The number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is what? Medical expenses. It's still true. All that a man has, he will give for his life. However, put forth your hand now. And remember what now means. Now is when Job is still down here on the lower stage. See, as we're watching the play, we're seeing this happening, but we're also out of the corner by watching these people down here as they are just limping through, trying to come to grips with what is happening. They're already a mess down here. If you put forth your hand now, after they've lost all those other things, touch his bone and his flesh. You didn't let me do that last time. That wasn't fair, God. If you let me do that, now that he's lost everything else, he will curse you to your face. And as we're watching the play, we're sitting here out in the cheap seats, and we're watching the play. We just know that God will say, no, Satan, enough is enough. You've done enough. Leave him be. Don't you know that's where what God should say, that's the line he should have next? But instead we gasp at the next line in the play because God responds to Satan, behold, he is in your power. Only spare his life. What a line. And one I hope God never says about any other person in the history of his dealings with people. Have you ever known somebody that seemed to be a modern day Job? Behold, he is in your power, only spare his life. Remember this, the devil has limits. He is not given complete power at any point. He is still, God's devil, still under the authority of God. So we're going to move back to the lower stage because soon as the devil gets this permission, he wastes no time. He went out from the presence of the Lord. What a terrible line to be said. We see this again in John chapter 13, where we have a man, and it says that Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, and he went out, and it was night. Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote not the cattle, not the sheep, not the camels, not the crops, but Job himself. With sore boils, we've got something happening with the skin from the sole of his foot, so that's the bottom of the foot, to the crown of his head. Have you ever had shingles? Shingles can affect any part of your body. You can even have them internally. And when you have shingles, and in just one part, your whole body feels it, doesn't it? And with Job, there is no part of his body that is released from that pain. Now, he took a potsherd to scrape himself while he was sitting among the ashes. We'll come back to this likely, sitting among the ashes. But I want us to look at what has happened to Job in this moment, because there are some real life applications. How do we react when someone we love has a diagnosis of a long-term illness? And this is what Job has. And he has quite a few symptoms. If we go through the book of Job, here are some of the symptoms that we know about. Whatever he has, it is accompanied by a loss of appetite. He just can't eat. We see this a lot here in the lodge. You need to eat to keep up your strength. I just don't want to eat. And we watch as people get thinner and thinner and thinner. The loss of appetite accompanied by fever. He's very hot. And all of the other things that come with that fever, the confusion, all of those things. And as a common symptom of a long-term illness, depression sets in. And Job wishes he was not alive. I curse the day I was born. Weeping, the constant crying. Have you ever lived with someone who cries a lot? And then sleeplessness. I am so tired, but I can't seem to get any sleep. And when he does get some sleep, look at the next symptom, nightmares. When I do go to sleep, my mind is full of all of this stuff, because you know the devil doesn't just stop attacking in his body. He is attacking his mind. And the nightmares, if you have lost a child, you know what it is to have nightmares about that loss. Multiply that by 10. We see twice it is referred to a putrid breath. So there is something internally that is causing the smell of decay to come up from his breathing. Failing vision, rotting teeth, haggard looks, inflamed sores accompanied by itching that needs to be scratched. That's the potsherd where he's scratching himself. Difficulty breathing, continual pain, anxiety, and diarrhea. Now, if you were to go to the doctor tomorrow with this list of symptoms, what do you think he would do with you? He'd probably admit you and start running 1,000 tests and putting you through all of the pain of all of the tests. But Job doesn't have even the luxury of a doctor, because he is now at a place where, since he has a skin disease, where does he need to be? Outside of the village. You know, we got our first real taste of this during COVID. What it was like to be shut off from people because you were sick. And being so afraid that if you had touched something, it might make someone else sick. And Job, who has been, we know from the big introduction, the big man of the city, the leading citizen, the greatest man in all of the East, it said, is now out sitting among the ashes. Where are the ashes? Well, when you clean out a fire and you lift up the ashes, where do you put them? Out with the trash, the garbage. They're taken outside of the city to the garbage heap with the rest of the outcast people. So now Job has lost not only all of his possessions, not only his wealth, and now not only his health, but he has now lost companionship. He is no longer the man. Before, everybody was coming over to the house and bringing a casserole and, oh, Job, this is so hard. But now he's being shunned and he is outside of the city. Now, people who have a long-term illness with the kinds of symptoms that we were talking about, I looked up what are the common ways that we behave when we have a long-term chronic pain. What are the normal behaviors? And this is what the internet says people typically do when they get a diagnosis of a long-term or terminal illness. Disbelief and shock. That makes sense. Fear, anxiety about the future, what we had planned can't happen since the doctor gave us the diagnosis of dementia. Everything is different now. What will happen? Disorientation, confusion, difficulty making decisions or concentrating. Sometimes apathy and emotional numbness. I just don't feel anything. Nightmares, recurring thoughts about the event. Irritability. How many of you, when you're sick, you'll admit a little bit of irritability and anger, sadness, and depression? The one that used to get up and want to go out for a Sunday afternoon drive now just wants to sit around the house and not do much of anything at all. A feeling of powerlessness. Job, who had been the leading man, now has no influence and he feels powerless. A change in eating patterns. A loss of appetite or overeating. Or they say, I'm hungry, and so you go and make food, and then when you bring it to them, all of a sudden, they don't want it. Excessive crying. Headaches. Back pain. Stomach problems. These are all psychosomatic things. Our body reacts to this kind of news. Difficulty sleeping. Or if you can get to sleep, difficulty staying asleep. And often an increased use of alcohol and drugs as we turn to substances to try to deal with the pain. Now, those of us who have lived with people who are in chronic pain understand that this is not easy. Because here's a reality. When one member of a family hurts, the rest of the family hurts along with them. This is not easy. Now, we're going to stay here at Act 2, Scene 3 on the lower stage, and we're going to see a new character that we have not met before. Then his wife, Mrs. Job. Now, Mrs. Job gets a bad rap. I Googled images of Job's wife, and most of them made her look like this. Her face is scowly. She just doesn't come across as a very nice lady. And yet, I want us to look at Job's wife. Because you see, we have to remember, Job is not the only one in pain. This is not in the scripture, but the Jewish rabbis put some words in Mrs. Job's mouth, and this is one of the things that they say about her. That she said to Job, Job, I have double the pain that you have, because I had the pain of bearing those children and then burying them. My pain, Job, is doubled. And the loss that she has had is the same as the loss that Job has had. Before, if she needed something, she was quite used to being able to just going out and getting it. The richest woman in the area. She was the one that when the other women saw her going by, they said, wow, can you imagine what it would be like to be Mrs. Job? But now, her pain, because she too has lost 10 children. She too stood beside those graves, probably having to help dig because there's no one else to do the work. She too had suffered the loss of the wealth and possessions when before anything she needed was at her beck and call and there was a servant to bring it to her. She was now the suffering and shamed wife, because none of this would be happening to Job if he wasn't somehow a bad man. We just have all been fooled all these years. And so before, when she walked by and the women all said, oh, can you imagine what it's like to be Job's wife? Now they say, oh, can you imagine what it must be like to be Job's wife? And she has now lost her companion. Because before this, when she'd lost her children, there was someone to hold her. There was someone to wrap her in his arms and say, honey, this is how we started. We'll rebuild. We're going to be okay. There was someone to whisper in her ear, you're so beautiful. But now, there is nothing. No intimacy, no companionship. These people had 10 children. There was some romance in this marriage. And it's gone. We don't know how long this sitting in the ashes and the grief lasted before Job's wife finally spoke. But when she does speak, it's quite a line that is put into her mouth. Because she says to him, Job, when we had lost all our children, and I watched you kneel in the dirt and bless God while I mourned the loss of my babies. And you said, oh, we'll rebuild. But now you can't rebuild anything. And I am now the one having to go out and try to scrape up enough just to bring you out something to eat. She is now the sole provider. And she says, I watched you kneel in the ground and I supported you in that. But at this point, I have to say, Job, are you still holding fast to your integrity? How? You need to get a grip, Job. The God that you have blessed is not a good God. I understood when it was all good, and I rejoiced with you in that goodness. But to be able to say now, Job, you wanted to make sure God was so happy with you, and you did all those sacrifices. But Job, God is not very happy with you. And quite honestly, right now, neither am I. When we're hurting, do you still hold fast your integrity? Now, I want you to note something. Here she is quoting God's line about Job. He still holds fast his integrity. The Hebrew is parallel, same thing. She is quoting God here. Nobody is saying that Job is not a man of integrity yet. Nobody is saying that. But after she quotes God's evaluation of Job, then she quotes the very words that Satan had said. Job, curse God and die. And here's what she's saying. Because her life right now has no hope of getting any better. We don't know if it's been days, weeks, or months, but Job has shown no improvement, and her life is on a complete standstill. She doesn't know that he's going to get any better, and she cannot move on as long as Job is still alive. At that point, there is one point where it talks about his bad breath, but we all know the line when he says, my breath is offensive to my wife. What he's saying is the fact that I am still breathing is a stumbling block for my wife. She and I both know it would be better for her if I was not alive. And friends, can we just be honest? Sometimes when we are in a terminal illness and a difficulty, these kinds of thoughts go through our mind, do they not? It would be better if I was just not here. They could move on. This is reality in the book of Job. And what she is saying to him is this: we know that God will not allow anyone to curse him and live. This is a capital offense. So what you need to do, Job, stop hanging on to this pie in the sky that you have. You need to just curse God and let him finally kill you and put us both out of our misery. This is real, isn't it? And Job has now lost not only his possessions, not only his children, but the comfort of his wife. Oh, she may still be bringing him lunch out at the ash heap outside of town, but the empathy in her eyes is gone. She's just exhausted. And Job responds to her. Anytime you get two people in this kind of pain, the conversations can get quite ugly. How is Job going to respond? As the audience watching the play, we are waiting for the response that he is going to give to this woman who has just basically become Satan's handmaid to get him to do what Satan said he would do, curse God. How will Job respond? But he said to her, sweetheart, you're talking like a foolish woman. Note, he doesn't say she is foolish, but she's talking like someone who doesn't know God. You're talking like somebody that I know you're not. See, Mrs. Job is not a bad person. Job could not have got where he was, had the kinds of children that he did, had the kind of place in society that he did, if he was married to a tacky woman. This was a woman of quality. But she has forgotten who she is in her pain. We can do this. And he says, you're speaking like you don't know who you are anymore. You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. And then he says, don't you remember every time one of the babies was born? How I would come into the tent and you would show me the baby, and together we would thank God for the goodness that he has given us. 10 times, every time one of the servants came back with a good report that said, Job, you're richer than you were yesterday. Together, we thanked the goodness of God, and we accepted and received that as from God. Now, if we did that then, sweetheart, can we not accept what he's giving us now? Just like Jeremiah and later Paul said, does the clay have a right to say to the potter, why have you made me thus? Many of us, after serving God for decades, find ourselves in pain. I am heartbroken to hear Brother Weidman's request for our brother Don Corbin. Faithful man of God. I don't want him to be in pain. But Job gives a reality to life here. He's rehashing the same response he had in chapter 1. The Lord gives. Shall we accept good from God? And the Lord takes away and not accept adversity. We thanked God with everything we had when it was good because we knew his character was good. We have to learn to do this same thing again, knowing his character. Here's some lessons. Because in all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. And I don't know about you, but when I'm in pain and hurting, do you know how I tend to sin? My mouth. I want us to get a little bit of counsel from Job here as we wrap up on dealing with a family member in pain. It is hard. I've asked people, I don't know which is harder, to be the one having the physical pain or the one watching the one having the physical pain and unable to fix it, to change it, to address it. But Job gives some good counsel here from his example. Number 1, listen well. Listen well. Because even in his words to his wife was a gentle response. Oh, sweetheart, you're speaking like a foolish woman. That's not who you are. He doesn't interrupt her. He listens to her, and then he responds with truth. Not with an argument, but with truth. Speaking reality into the situation. He doesn't hide things. I think we get into a lot of trouble when we hide things. He responds with truth, and then he models, he speaks what they have learned about God, and he models the correct response to that. Do you remember, sweetheart, all the good things we've received from God? Let's think about them. And it's easy for her to say, I don't want to think about them. I don't want to think about the 10 kids. Every time I think about them, my heart is more broken. But he says we have to remember the good things and not let the bad things, listen to this, not let the bad that has happened taint the memory of the good things. That is so important. We know what we know about God. He gives, he takes away, because he is God. Blessed be his name. And he maintained verbal purity, because the temptation for him had to have been to respond in like kind. What a temptation she gave him. She offered him an out. Curse God and this can all be over. And accept them completely and love them unconditionally. We're not all the same people we were when we got married, were we? We look a little different. We think a little different. And when we watch someone we love deteriorate, when we were pastoring, we had a wonderful, blessed couple in our church, Walt and Pat. And Walt adored Pat. And when Pat was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, as she was getting steadily worse and worse, and I went to Walt and I said to him, Walt, how are you doing? He said, I'm not doing good. He said, the hardest part besides the dread and then having to make sure she doesn't burn the house down, getting up in the middle of the night to try to cook food. The hardest thing is I had always pictured us sitting on the porch after all the kids were grown and gone, and we'd sit and we'd talk about the memories, and we sit on the porch, but there's only one of us that shares the memories. And it's hard. But I will say, Walt Newman loved his wife unto the end. Matter of fact, just quickly, there was a day when we got a call from Walt and Pat's daughter. She said the police, she had just gone to the house to check on them. She said, both of my parents are dead. I don't know what has happened. Have you called the police? So the police are on their way. Sean ran over there immediately. And all I was thinking was, because they said the oven was open, and I thought, what has Walt done? Has he just decided that it was time for both of them to go? Here's what happened. While they were both in bed, Walt, out of the blue, had a heart attack and died in his sleep. Pat woke up having no idea that Walt was dead. She got up to try to fix herself breakfast, but Walt wasn't there to give her her insulin shot and prepare her food. So she went into a diabetic shock and passed out and died in the kitchen. Neither one of them ever feeling the loss of the other. And Sean said at the funeral, the only double funeral we've ever done. And he said, I think the Lord just came to take Walt. And Walt was so concerned about Pat that he said, well, Lord, Pat. And the Lord just said, why don't we just take her along with us? Accept them completely and love them unconditionally. Some principles here. Satan attacks love relationships by suggesting hard thoughts. He'll whisper in your ear that God doesn't love you, your husband doesn't love you, your kids don't really love you. When you hear those kinds of whisperings, know that that's from the devil. Those are his words. And he is a liar. Our pain is never without cause, even though we don't see it. We'll talk about this a little more. And this is an important one. Being your own executioner is not being your own deliverer. See, Job's wife encouraged him to do something that would cause his death, to curse God. And we can toy with suicidal thinking that, that would be the end of it all. And these are thoughts that come to us when we are in pain and there is no promise that the pain will end. And we can know Jesus and still have these thoughts come through our minds. But that is not the way deliverance works. Because, see, death is not the end. It's never the end. all that does is it transfers the pain to someone else. And I say that as someone, my sister died by suicide. Trying to end her pain, the pain was multiplied in the lives of her daughters to this day. We have no right to take our own life to try to stop the pain. Only God has that prerogative. And there's nothing wrong with asking him for deliverance. I've stood by I was a hospital chaplain in Omaha, and I've stood by a few beds with some saints where I have said, Lord, it's time. But that's God's call. Watch your words when others are suffering. You have no idea the pain that it can cause. And never suggest the compromise of integrity during difficult times. This is very easy for us to do. And as Job had to learn, in your pain, remember the very real pain of others. And like Job, during difficult times, a consideration of the mercies of God is often quite needed. We've received good things from God. Let's count them. When upon life's billows you are tempted and tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings. Every doubt will fly, and you will be singing as the days go by. Now, I don't know what Job was singing on his ash pile. He was probably singing the blues. But it's a good counsel. Remember the good things that we have received from God because they outweigh the bad things. Help us, Lord, in our pain. Lord, and when others around us who we live with are in pain, Father, you have given us each other for the purpose of encouraging and strengthening. May we do that, dear Lord. Show us how. Lord, if there's any here who are not doing well in this particular area, Father, I ask that you would give them words of life, both to speak and to believe. Help us, Lord, remember that there are others hurting in this world, and our heart breaks for the loss and the pain. Lord, I am asking you that you would make Maranatha Village the kind of place populated with the kind of people who, when there needs to be a proof of integrity, even in pain and loss and difficulty, that it would be easily found right here on Norton Road. Would you help us, even at the stage of life that we are in, when we have had so many things? Help us, Father, to hold fast to our integrity. And remind us, God, that in this village we are a family. And help us to come around those in pain, walking with them, sticking together with words and actions of encouragement. Lord, may you help us in the difficult times of our life to be like Job. Father, quite honestly, we don't want to be like Job. But God, we want to be like Job. And to do so, we need your help. So we ask you to help us. Amen. The curtain goes down on scene 2. And next week, we are going to find a wonderful couple of verses that are going to encourage us on what we should do when someone we care about is hurting. We learned from Job's wife what not to do. Next week, we're going to see 3 men who knew what to do. Now, if only they'd kept their mouths shut for the rest of the book, it would have been better. But they started out well. And we're going to learn from their example next week. Now, may the Lord keep you in his mighty care, and may he bless you. And may the hedge of protection stay up. In Jesus' name, amen. Oh, breakfast this Saturday at 9 o'clock at Chick-fil-A.